Good morning. I was going to ask you if you're all pumped up, but I think the dog did that for me. So, my name is Robert Benton. I have been at 3 Principals First conferences, and I'm originally from Texas. You always have to say that, but about 20 years I've lived here in D.C. Today I would like to introduce our next panel. First of all, we have Barbara Comstock, a former Congresswoman from the 10th District of Virginia. And then we have a slight replacement. Judge Ludwig's plane did not take off this morning. So, well, you can't say that one. So we have Gregg. So, Gregg Nunziata, who is the executive director of the, I was about to say it wrong, the Society for the Rule of Law is here with us. And then also we have a very sedate and measured person to kind of fill in for Judge Ludwig, noted constitutional lawyer George Conway. Take it away.
All right, well, so I'm moderating this supposedly, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming out here. It is just amazing to see the crowd here and how numerous it is and how excited it is and how vociferous it is. And I've spoken to some of you. I want to speak to more of you, and I just know what good people you are, and I'm so proud to be part of this organization. So I want to just briefly introduce Gregg. Gregg is the president of the Society for the Rule of Law, which is an organization that we originally called Checks and Balances, which is actually the title of this panel. And it, you know, we're the conservative and libertarian lawyers who took the fork in the road and went the right way. Okay? And Gregg is a perfect example of somebody who took the fork in the road and went the right way. He is a longtime member of the conservative legal movement. He served as chief nominations counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee under Senator Arlen Specter. He was an advisor to the Senate Policy Committee, the Republican Senate Policy Committee. He was a counsel to Senator Marco Rubio. And now he's been Washington. He's a recovered lawyer, like all of the rest of us on this panel, and we recruited him desperately to run the Society for the Rule of Law because the rest of us know nothing about running anything other than our mouths. So Gregg is here. He's filling in for Judge Ludwig, but so you have to be a little more pessimistic than you normally are.
I'll try.
Okay. Doom, gloom. Okay. And on my right is the unmatchable Barbara Comstock. And Barbara Comstock, you know, I've known Barbara since the 1990s when we were both part of a very small group that wasn't really a group and wasn't really cohesive, but it was called by someone whose name I forget, the Vast Right-Wing Conspiracy. And it wasn't vast, and at that time, Barbara was the bête noire of the Clinton administration because she was chief counsel of the Senate Government House Government Reform and Operations Committee or something like that, right? Yeah, the Burton Committee, we all knew it as, and they were continually investigating weird goings-on over at the White House, and she drew the enmity of many people over there because she was such a staunch fighter. And then she went on to do greater things. She decided to go into electoral politics. She became a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. And she was the same person then that she was in the 90s, and then she went on to represent the 10th Congressional District in Virginia for a number of years, and she was considered to be one of the most productive and legislators in the United States House of Representatives until the current debacle came along, and it was no longer good to be a solid conservative. You had to kiss the ring of the then President of the United States during what I call shit show 1. And so she failed to do that, and now she's here with us, and that's our great benefit. And I just want to say, I mean, she and I were, it's like, I feel a kinship to her, Barbara. I didn't really know her that well in the 1990s, but, you know, our views have not changed, right? We on policy matters, if you go check, 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 we believe in the same things we believed then. And we believed, and the reason why we became such, you know, I ended up kind of spurring the impeachment of Bill Clinton by writing briefs for Paula Jones. We thought he was a bad guy because he was a liar, Clinton, and because he forced himself upon women, and then he was just, you know, this was not proper conduct for the President of the United States. He's an angel, okay? We did not change. We are the two consistent people in this country.
We supported all the impeachment.
Yeah, I am like, you got an impeachment, I'm there. So anyway, it's really great to have this panel, and we also have Clyde the Corgi. We heard we had a little incident yesterday with the Proud Boys. He is our security. He will lick them to death. And he is our mascot dog. And he is 50 times smarter than the President of the United States. Now, you think it's more than that, don't you? Yes. All right, so our panel is about American constitutionalism and where it's going, where it is, how bad is it going to get, and will the checks and balances hold? And that's a very, very disturbing topic. It's a very difficult topic. And I'm going to start with our former member of the Article 1 branch here. Where are we? How bad is it? And where are we going? And what are we going to do about it? And you've got 30 minutes.
Well, listen, the Article 1 branch needs to do a little bit of its own, do some homework. Recently, there was a member, I believe he's a freshman from Alaska, and he said something to the effect of, I can't do anything. Kind of remarkable. And the House of Representatives only has about a 3-vote margin, and he's telling his constituents, I can't do anything. As Doge is coming in here and just, the guy's using a chainsaw, the glasses with a chainsaw, blindly cutting everything. Now, certainly there's always room to cut and to do things, and you can do that, but the Article 1 branch should be involved. They should have a role in this. They actually set up a Doge committee, which they voted not to have the Doge guy come and testify in front of them. So you have this guy who's unelected. We used to complain about unelected bureaucrats. So you have the unelected Doge guy who they're now saying isn't head. In court, they actually said, oh no, he's not the head of it, even though the president said he is the head of it.
Lying.
And then they have these kids, one of the 19-year-old Big Balls, who I think is the grandson of a KGB agent, they recently found out. And they say, oh, don't worry, we vetted them. But we know from Trump 1, they really don't vet people, because John Kelly found, when John Kelly, the chief of staff, the second chief of staff came in, nobody was really being vetted, and he had to kick out a lot of people, and we know there's no John Kelly there anymore, so who knows how they're vetting people. Basically, if the president just wants to say, I bless thee and you're vetted, that's the vetting they're doing, so we can only, who knows how they're being vetted, probably not being vetted. But at any rate, the guy saying, I can't do anything is wrong. So let me just give you one example of how they could be doing something, and fortunately, the state attorneys general are doing something. They had this NIH, they're across this going in and saying we're going to cut these NIH funds. Back when I was still in Congress, 17, 18, the Heritage Foundation, they came up with this idea. This is one of these Project 2025 things where they think we could just go in and cut how they do the NIH funding. And they came in and gave a big pitch on how they should do this. They thought they knew it all. And all of these various institutions came into Congress and explained why heritage was wrong and why there's different ways that different institutions do their funding. And we had about 240 plus Republicans in the House then, and obviously had the Senate. And we looked at that very carefully and realized that different institutions and different universities have different ecosystems, because there's large universities, there's small universities, there's whole, businesses and ecosystems built around them. For example, in Alabama, Senator Shelby, who was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, he had built up a huge ecosystem in Alabama around NIH funding and had lots of money in there and lots of jobs and was building up all of this. And since 2014, when Newt Gingrich said, hey, we need to double NIH funding because we want to cure things like diabetes and Alzheimer's, because they are huge drivers of the federal budget. And if we cure diabetes or get better treatments for diabetes and Alzheimer's, the things that are driving the budget and busting the budget, you're going to have a huge, it's going to come down. And of course, those are the things, if you have diabetes, those are the amputations. That's what's, right now, Alzheimer's is just set to explode. And if you have somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's in your life, you know what a burden that is. So we said we want to double the cost of Alzheimer's funding. So at any rate, we looked at all of that pitch that Heritage gave back then, and not only did we say no to that, we said, hell no, we aren't changing the funding, and we put into law, you cannot change the funding without Congress coming in and specifically changing the law. And guess who signed that bill? Donald Trump. And
you think he read the bill?
Yeah, well, of course, he didn't know what he was signing, but useful idiot signed the bill. And every year since then, they've signed the bill saying you cannot change that in law. So 8 years since then, it has been signed into law that you cannot change that formula. So when they come in and Chainsaw Massacre guy with his shades, not knowing what he's doing, says, we're going to do that, he doesn't know what he's doing. It's right. So all the Democrat AGs filed their, in court, and it's already been stopped. So it's been stopped, but they're the only ones who did it, the Democrat AGs. And in their briefs, they said, okay, we're going to stop it, but if you don't file it, it's only stopped in the Democrat states. So in my state of Virginia, the Republican AG, who certainly doesn't want to cross King Trump, it's not been stopped in Virginia. So our whole ecosystem and all our NIH funding is at risk. And down in Alabama, their funding is also at risk because they're scared to go up against King Trump.
I hate to interrupt, but this is what I do. We have ecosystem level, but we have a more global level or a universal level, the universe of democracy. Couple questions there. I mean, I hear what you're saying about members of Congress basically saying, what can we do? And we saw Chuck Schumer the other day saying, Congress should do this. It's like, oh yeah, do you know anybody in Congress? You should talk to them.
Yeah, but fortunately, the AGs know, and actually, like Jeff Jackson in North Carolina was a member of Congress, so he knows this.
But let me,
and if you're in North Carolina, you've got an awesome AG.
Let me defend the supine Article 1 branch. So what does Congress do? They pass laws. If Trump decides, hey, we're not going to obey those laws, does it really help to pass another law saying, thou shalt obey the laws that we have previously passed? So what is it that they can do? Seriously.
Well, everyone who was there last year, know they passed this particular bill.
But so what?
And it's
just law.
Well, you as the people need to remind them, because there's example of this, where we've actually discussed these bills.
Do you have any people in mind?
Yeah, so you need to go back and talk about, so a lot of these things have been discussed and debated, like NIH funding, and we've decided we want to cure these diseases, and this is something we want to spend more money on so that in the long term, we can save ourselves a lot of heartbreak and save our families heartbreak. This is what we want to invest and spend money on. So, Mr. Crazy Guy, why don't you go take care of the children you aren't spending your money on and deal with that.
Let's have Gregg come in here, and I want to just focus you in on, do we have a constitutional system where the president has decided he can ignore statutes of Congress and appoint somebody who doesn't even read the statute of Congress, doesn't care about that? And what can they do? And does it come down to the courts? And then that raises the question of, this man who has basically running roughshod over every statute you can imagine, everything from, the Constitution, in fact, birthright citizenship, appropriations bills. What happens when the courts tell him you can't do that? And he's going to say, well, why should I listen to you? I don't listen to Congress.
Yeah, well, thank you, George. First thing, and I think you're both getting at this, we need to continue to make just a fundamental case for the basics of our Constitution and the rule of law and American democracy, because people are forgetting it. Members of Congress are forgetting it, but more importantly, the voters who send them there are forgetting it. It's part of our project of the Society for the Rule of Law. I was speaking at a prestigious law school just this week, and a law student, these are young kids now, whose kind of entire consciousness has been in the Trump era, asked me a question which seemed pretty simple to me, but it was sincere. He said, conservative student, he said, it seems today that politics is all about winning, and the legal part is about getting the wins to stick. How do we convince people that the law or the Constitution matters for their own sake, right, and that they should be restraining principles on our desire to win?
It's all well and good to worry about Alzheimer's funding and this funding and that funding, but we can't spend money on everything. How do we decide? Is it just a unilateral ukase of a dictator? Or is it a process where you persuade people who get elected to Congress to compromise or to turn around and change things? What do we do?
Congress makes the laws, and it's a divided country, and to make a law, you need to convince people on the other side to come at least part of the way with you, and that's a good thing for America. We should all believe in it, and we should get voters to vote on it. That's a longer term project right now. We're not there, but we need to kind of recover our first principles as a country. In the near term, yeah, I mean, I think we are heading to a situation where we're going to have to depend on the courts. I'd love to have your thoughts on this, George. I mean, I'm still reasonably optimistic about our judiciary. I think.
Okay, you're not filling in for Ludig.
No, I mean, look, I've had criticisms, but for the most part.
Let me just do my Judge Ludig. It's over. Okay, there we go.
For the most part, the first time Trump nominated normal conservative judges. And I hear from very conservative federal court judges all the time that are grateful for the work we're doing in the Society for the Rule of Law and have real concerns about where we're headed. I think you're going to see a different kind of person nominated by Trump this time. So I'm very worried about that.
Justice Eileen Cannon.
Yeah, but because they won't have hearings, here's the problem. They set up this DOJ committee, but then they won't have hearings. You aren't seeing the discussion of what should be cut. Because if you had a discussion, every day they stand up and say things like, oh, we're spending $100 million on condoms in Gaza, which of course is false. The money that was spent on condoms in Africa to stop AIDS. Now, you can decide whether you think that's valuable or not. That's money that has been spent over the past 20 years to prevent AIDS, and that is, we debated that, and we have supported that on a bipartisan basis, and Republicans have supported that. If they want to have a discussion in a hearing and decide whether they like that or not, have that discussion. Trump has also been standing there saying, we are giving Social Security payments to people who are 150 years old. That is absolutely false. But he keeps standing at the podium with the chainsaw guy making these claims that we are making payments to people who are in the system who are 120 or 150, and we know that is false. If we had hearings, the adversary process where you have Democrats and Republicans, but you actually had to show receipts and facts. That's what I did. When I was a chief counsel, people actually had to sit there and you'd say to somebody, okay, Marjorie Taylor Greene, show your facts. You don't just get to stand there at a podium with our latest press secretary who makes claims and doesn't have any facts to state it. These guys won't have hearings. When they had the hearings for the secretaries that they've now put in there, they wouldn't even have a second round of questions. They did 5 minutes and then oh, whoa, boy, we are not going to have a second round of questions with these clowns. We cannot survive a second round of questions.
So this goes to the question, the bigger question, because I'm trying to elevate it. That's what Congress is for, to have a debate.
Is terrified to have a debate. They don't have debates. They cut off debate. They are just, giving up their authority to Donald Trump.
We have an abdicating.
Yeah, they're abdicating. So if they don't want to be there, then maybe the first thing that should be cut is their budgets, because I think Adam Kinzinger has pointed out, if you look at his Twitter feed, they have increased their budgets tremendously under Republican control. Congress their budgets are a lot bigger than when I was there. And I can tell you, our budgets were fine when I was there. They have increased their salaries. They get a big allowance to be able to pay for themselves, to have a bigger allowance while they're there. And because they weren't making enough money, folks. They said they didn't have enough money to live on. And now they're getting bigger salary allowances, bigger staff allowances, but they're not doing anything.
Let me barge in again with two follow-up questions. One is, in the past, we have seen Congress people of the president's party, Democrat or Republican, push back on the White House because they're an independent branch. The framers believed that having an independent legislative branch, independent from the executive, not a Westminster system, would result in conflicting power centers so that you could push back on the executive. First question is, what happened to the Republicans? Why don't they have spine? Why are they so afraid of even raising the smallest disagreement with this president? That's point one. And question two is, where's the opposition and what can the opposition do to hold it? They can't hold hearings of their own, can they? But what can they do to restore the debate that is supposed to happen in the Article 1 institutions?
Well, they have, Trump has put out, made it very clear, as has Elon, that they will primary anyone who disagrees with them, anyone who gets out of line. And a few senators who weren't going to support the nominees, Hegseth was one of the first that they were maybe not going to support for obvious reasons. Trump made a very public showing of announcing, hey, who would like to primary this particular senator who was maybe going to vote against? And that senator got in line, and it wasn't good enough for Trump that the senator got in line. Trump then went out to the press and put out the story that he had gotten the senator in line by going out and making this very public showing. So that is how they do it. Not only does he go out and say, hey, who wants to run against this senator who's up in 2 years, but then he has to go humiliate them in public by putting out that story. And that's done by Trump, it's done by his henchmen, campaign people, and then it's done by Elon by threatening he'll put the money out there.
What can the Democrats do then?
Well, the Democrats should highlight that. They can highlight that in the hearings, but of course the hearings are truncated. So Democrats probably should have some hearings of their own. Democrats should definitely have more town halls themselves, and they should highlight these kind of issues. I know in Virginia, my senators, well, they did a teletown hall, but they've also started doing town halls, and they're huge, and they've pointed out that they're much larger than they've ever been before, and they should be just telling these stories, and they should be telling the stories of these issues that they've voted on before, and how this is, and get local, and how this is impacting.
Gregg?
No, yeah, I wanted to.
And they should also tell about the things that they're willing to cut, because there are things in government that can be cut. The things that Republicans aren't cutting, because Republicans are now going to keep the things that they want for their districts, but then not, so not cut their favorite things, while they're going to go after, things in Democrat districts.
And I don't want to let Republicans off the hook for sure, but the weakness of Congress is a bit of a bipartisan problem. One of the most tragic things of the last several years, to me, in this whole area, was after the first Trump term, there was a bipartisan effort to put some limits on presidential power and to restore congressional powers. A couple of bipartisan team of former White House counsels teamed up, former executive branch lawyers teamed up to do this, Bob Bauer, Jack Goldsmith. There was a package of bills that Democrats were championing in Congress called the Protecting Our Democracy Act. As soon as there was a Democrat in the president, they lost interest. They had a Democrat in the White House, and Democrats were all of a sudden opposed to strengthening Congress again and putting checks in the presidency. Americans need to stop thinking about politics as just a team sport. I know all of you in this room understand that. We need a strong Congress. We need a limited executive.
Didn't Marco Rubio, he did the bill about not being able to pull out of NATO, right? Did he? What was that bill?
Yeah, no, he led an effort to pass a law saying the president can't unilaterally pull out of NATO without Congress's support.
Okay, so let me move the subject to the third branch. Do you think, I'll ask you, third branch, I believe, I'm going to throw this out there because I've been beating this drum for a few weeks now, is that due to this man's and President Musk's, psychology and co-President Trump's or Assistant President Trump's mentality, they don't think they're subject to rules. They're disobeying laws. Why do we have any reason to believe? And right now it's very likely that they are evading court orders by saying the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. We're trying to do this, and they're making representations to the court, including the representation about what Elon is and whether he is the administrator of Doge and whether he's just an Anita Dunn who just sits in her office in the West Wing. Okay, do you think he's going to obey court orders when he starts losing some of these cases? He'll win some of them. He's going to lose some of them.
Yeah, no, I think he is going to lose some of them. So, I don't know, in my judgment, this president has done some imprudent things.
You mean
he's also
the convicted criminal who's in the White House?
Yeah, so he's also doing unconstitutional and probably illegal things. And I think it's really important for us, and particularly the lawyers among us, to try to tease those things out. It's not to say that you shouldn't oppose the president's unwise things or bad policies. Feel free. But understand what is really a challenge to our system and what is really a legal problem or a constitutional problem. And there's a host of them here. And I think the courts are going to see that.
But the legal problems morph into constitutional problems.
Absolutely.
Because if the president decides, the statute says X, you shall expend money on Y, and then it also says, and you can't change that unless you get Congress to change the law, which it shouldn't have to say anyway, but why, what? That's a constitutional problem.
Yeah.
That the president is forsaking and abrogating the very first thing he's told to do in Article 2, which is to faithfully execute the laws. So, is the Constitution over?
Not yet. Not yet. No.
And how close are we?
I mean, I think we're close, right? I mean, I think that the president and his allies are trying to delegitimize the courts. They are trying to condition the public and their supporters to accept the White House defying a court order. And we can't let them do that. And I think it's really important to get, look, here's the thing. We say at the Society for the Rule of Law that we're a group of conservative lawyers who put the Constitution and the rule of law, American democracy, above our partisan or policy preferences. That shouldn't even be that controversial. It's like a minority position now. I mean, I think if you talked to conservative lawyers 10 years ago and you laid out that statement, they say, of course, that's what conservative lawyers do. Of course those things
stop
come first.
President Obama from doing just that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, we need to be out there and get people engaged and make the case and draw red lines now because they're going to try to get away with whatever they can get away with. And I think it's important to get people and groups and leaders and institutions on the record about those red lines now before we get into a fight where partisans go to their corners. I mean, we ought to be saying loudly how destabilizing and dangerous it would be for a president to defy an order of the Supreme Court.
But haven't we
Well,
been...
and all these executive orders, they aren't law. So if you're a conservative and you want conservative policy, all these things that are being done by executive order, you're not getting the policy changes you want. And these, so if you're concerned about having things change, and then give you another example, I've worked on antitrust law, and the past 4 years, I was bashing the Biden administration on their bad antitrust laws. I thought Gary Gensler at the SEC was bad. I thought the Justice Department and what they were doing, and Lena Khan at the FTC, I thought they had horrible policies. I think Mark Cuban yesterday was saying, he told Gary Gensler, you're going to elect Trump because of what he was doing with crypto, and I agreed with that because they were doing anti-free market things. So I agreed on that. But guess who just endorsed the new merger guidelines that Biden administration put in place just last year, right? They just got put in place last year. I went to the Scalia Law School just last year to a whole program on how awful these merger guidelines were. And the Trump administration has now said, hey, we're keeping the merger guidelines. So if you care about conservative policy, which the antitrust policy that was in place before the Biden administration, before the Trump administration, was Bork antitrust consumer welfare policy. I'm getting a little nerdy here, but Judge Bork, who we all love here, who for years we had from the 80s forward through the Obama administration, that was the antitrust policy, consumer welfare standard, which was very good free market policy that allowed all the tech policy that we live with and that thrives. That was the policy that we had that was conservative.
But all of that doesn't go to the checks and balances.
Well, the check and balance was...
Hold on, let me.
Mr. Conway, may I ask a real-world question?
No, not yet. Okay.
Well, but I was just going to, my point was going to say that everybody thought with Trump you were going to have more mergers, but now what's going to happen is the only way you're going to get mergers is if it's going to be transactional with Trump, and he wants you to, it's going to be, you have to.
The extortion aspect,
yes,
that's a big
yes,
deal.
that's
But
my
let me
point,
just say,
yeah.
It's generally within the authority of the executive branch to decide, well, we want to do more on merger enforcement, we want to do less on merger enforcement, we want to tweak the merger guidelines. It's actually part of their job to do that. But what I want to get focused on is,
Mike.
what I want to get focused on is what happens when they go beyond or go beyond what they're legally authorized to do, or refuse to carry out a duty that is statutorily or constitutionally imposed on them. What do we do then? I mean, this is all nice. I mean, but this isn't the republic doesn't, the republic isn't going to survive or fall on whether or not people are following Bob Bork's thoughts in his book, The Antitrust Paradox. It's like the least of our problems.
Well, that's true, but I'm just from a Republican standpoint, just pointing out, you're not getting Republican policy with Donald Trump.
They don't care about policy.
That's true.
Okay. Well, thoughts?
Just a little sideline, but
No, look, I mean, it's just ultimately a test of the American people, right? I mean, it should not be acceptable for the president to defy an order of the Supreme Court. And
what are we going to do about it?
I mean, we got to be. I mean,
look at that. I've been trying to get to that.
But
what are we going? He's going to do this. Okay, I'm just going to say he will violate court orders, and once he violates court orders, what do we do?
we have to
Right?
hope that,
What do we do?
We have to hope there's a 5 to 4 majority.
It doesn't
for
matter. He's going to tell the Supreme. Why should he obey the Supreme Court? Why?
I mean, I think that it's ultimately right that people need to be in the streets. People need to be strongly reacting against it. We really do need conservatives and Republicans to be in that number for this to work, right? I mean, so.
Well, and you're going to have midterm elections, and you're going to have, that's the check and balance. It's going to be.
might.
Well, yeah, well, you are going to have congressional, you're going to have a Virginia election this year, you're going to have a check and balance, and that is what happened in his first term. Already he is, as Sarah and Longwell pointed out last night, he is doing the worst of any president except himself in his first term. And he's down in the mid-40s, and so he's going to start dragging people down. And when he starts dragging all the other people down with him, that's when the members of Congress start panicking. They're starting to see their constituents get upset.
Right.
Those town halls start scaring people. Now, I can tell you, they won't really get it until sometime next year. I can tell you, these guys, they all live in a red bubble. They don't really get it. What'll happen is, if Virginia goes blue again, they'll be like, well, that's Virginia. They never voted for Trump. They're going to wait until things go into next year. Then they're going to start seeing their polls go. Then some of them are going to start retiring, and the polls will start going a little south and a little south and a little south. They really aren't going to get it until, sometime next summer and next fall. And that's why you just need to be organizing now. You need to make sure somebody's running in all of those swing seats and that's what's going to happen. And then there's going to be it's checks and balances. And then when you have a Democrat House, that's when people will have to come in and will have to sit in there, and that's when they'll have to actually answer questions. And that will be the only check on him.
But here's the problem. What they can do is
between now and then is damaging, yes.
Well, it goes beyond that. Let's say you're right, and I agree with you. His poll numbers are going to drop. We're going to see more of these town halls where Republicans are getting reamed. And these Republicans, sooner or later, cowards that they are, will start buckling to some extent. Although the more extreme MAGA types will be funded to run against them and will be acting as a counterforce because those people are still there. Mm-hmm. Okay? They don't care whether the government of the United States is destroyed. But let's say 2026, let's say we do make it somehow to 2026, 50-50, I don't know. And the Democrats get substantial majorities in both houses of Congress, although not 2/3, not 60, not a true supermajority. You've got a president who's going to, so what do they do? Pass laws? President vetoes them. Pass laws, they override the veto. President ignores them. What then?
No, I mean, I don't have a good answer, right? I mean, it's a real problem. Our country works best when our leaders have some sense of stewardship and the inheritance that they have and the obligation they have to their citizens. The hope our founders had was in the branches checking each other, which they're failing to do. But ultimately, it does rest on the American people. I mean, it just does. I mean, it requires a massive. You think about, we've had presidents before who've been overreaching in different ways, right? FDR, lots of people love him, not my favorite. LBJ. And they've been checked. They've been
Nixon.
checked. They've been checked because they lost popular support, including in their own party, on important matters. You know, the FDR trying to pack the court. This is a massive rebellion, including amongst Democrats, about this dictatorial impulse. And I hope that America still has that somewhere in our lizard brain, an understanding of the fragility of liberty and the importance of putting limits on government actors, even if you might like the direction that actor is pushing in. And I hope that's still there. I mean, that's what I'm trying to argue for every day.
And that's where, I'm glad that's exactly the point we're trying to get to here. Do we still have that spirit? That spirit is in this room.
For sure.
But the degree of moral apathy that we have seen that has gotten us to this point where we actually have to worry that the president is going to run roughshod and basically ignore and neuter the other two branches of government. And many Americans don't understand why that would be a bad thing. Some of them, many of the Americans think, well, that's a good thing. I mean, Congress doesn't do anything anyway. All they do is bicker. And the courts, it's all political anyway. I mean, these... And then there's just a bunch of just, fooling around on Facebook and worrying about who gets Emmys or whatever. It's like, how do we wake up people to get them out to these town halls? That's it was really heartening to see that. And then ultimately, I personally believe even like now, people have to be out on the streets.
The popular part of
this.
Even
the New York Post had a cover that said, Putin is not a dictator. I mean, the New York Post is pushing back on Trump.
No, I think.
And people are and you see this. It's not just here in the United States. Everywhere, we have our German elections today. Hopefully they turn out okay. But you have, and you have the leading candidate in Germany is saying, hey, we may have to go it alone. And they're talking about working with France and with the UK about, we'll come together, we'll help Ukraine. And you have, God bless, Zelensky, we heard from everybody yesterday how they're going to work together. They're putting more money towards protecting themselves because they're looking at what they have here. So, people are thinking of different ways to do things if they have this horrible person that we have here as president. But people are not going to take this lying down. They are going to get up and act. And so that is do not accept this. And, don't be afraid of the bullies. We've got to stand up to the bullies. And it doesn't take everybody to do it. It doesn't take a majority to do it, but you have to stand up to the bullies. The Proud Boys came in here last night. Trump has clearly emboldened the bullies to act, and you just can't be afraid of them. That's what they want. He has bullied Congress. He's bullied his own Republicans. He's bullied the Democrats into thinking they're beaten. They've got a 3-seat majority in the House. It's not that many votes. You don't have to change that many in the House to win it back. So, the Democrats need to get their act back together and win these seats. You're going to have, governor's races and everything up. Nothing is ever as bad in politics as it seems, and nothing is ever as good. We are a 50-50 country. Things are going to snap back. You just have to people have to get out of this funk that, somehow this guy is invincible. He is not. There are people out there that are going to turn this around. And, this 9-year-old guy who eats cheeseburgers every day is not an invincible guy. And he's lazy. Yep. So,
he's active. He's golfing today. He is so physically active.
I think the popular resistance is important. I also, maybe an insular DC elitist lawyer type. There's also the elitist part that I think is kind of important. I mean, George and I, all three of us have been involved in the conservative legal movement for decades. And it is just dismaying where it's ended up today. I mean, the conservative lawyers, the conservative legal movement are meant to be the constitutional conscience of the right, not as willing enablers. And this is what we're trying to do to speak to our fellow conservatives, to fight for these principles. I've got, it's thin reeds to be hopeful about, but after what the Trump administration did in New York with the Mayor Adams prosecution, I thought there were some really encouraging signs of conservative lawyers who are basically pro-Trump, a lot more pro-Trump than we are.
Danielle Sassoon.
Yeah. A number of principal people resigned.
Who was the other lawyer who wrote that letter?
Fantastic.
The head assistant on the case.
Who said,
maybe you'll find a.
Oh, please, if you haven't read that, both of
fool or
those
a coward or
letters.
something.
Fool or a coward.
That's your future. Two conservative
Gregg
lawyers.
himself was the fool in the coward.
Who clerked for, Justice Roberts. I mean, I worked on Justice Roberts' confirmation. I worked on Alito's confirmation. But you had these two young lawyers who said, we are not going to be your stooges. That is awesome. There's your future. You just need a few people like that.
All right, we got 49 seconds left, and so I'll just hold on. Let me just say one thing here, and we'll take a question. What's the question?
Does the U.S. Marshal Service enforce federal court orders?
Yes, the U.S. Marshal Service enforces court orders. That's a problem. Because the United States Marshal Service reports is part of, it's an agency of the United States Department of Justice.
They switch loyalties. The red team does.
They've already replaced the U.S. Marshal Service. But let me finish here in the few seconds we have left. At the bottom line is, I believe, and I know some people don't believe it or don't want to believe it, but I've been talking to a lot of people, and when I press them, they can't tell me why it's not true. He will disobey court orders. The litigation is important, nonetheless, because it's going to show in a judicial opinions that we will be able to waive as we walk down Constitution Avenue, that this administration is completely contemptuous and completely ready to abrogate the rule of law. But at the end of the day, precisely for that point, the third branch has to rely on the second branch, the President of the United States, which the President of the United States ostensibly controls, who is charged with faithfully executing those laws, including those court orders enforcing those laws. And we have no reason to believe at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, that he will do that. And that is when we need to take our copies of those orders and walk down the street with them. And I want to thank everybody. We were out of time.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.